Good afternoon. My name is Bob Mueller, and I'm on the faculty here, the music department, and the performers have asked me to say just a few words about the piece you're about to hear, the Sonata Number 8, Opus 30, Number 2, composed in 1802, and dedicated to Tsar Alexander I, the ruler of Russia. And that's a very important dedication because Russia was allied with Austria against Napoleon and the French. And you might recall that at one point in time, Beethoven had thought of Napoleon as representing the people and that he was a hero. In fact, he may have written his third symphony with Napoleon in mind as this hero. But of course, famously, when Napoleon declared himself emperor of the French, Beethoven tore up that dedication and said he's just like everybody else, and was very disgusted with Napoleon. So there's a lot of intrigue going on in Vienna at this time between Beethoven and his circle and the officials, the government. So interesting that this is dedicated to Alexander I. Actually, for the next 10 years after 1802, Vienna is going to be in various times either surrounded by French armies or occupied by French armies. And there's always a lot of cannon fire going off, and some people used to speculate that Beethoven's deafness may have been caused by hearing all that cannon fire. But it's been, I think, pretty well proven now that it was actually caused by various diseases, natural causes. Anyway, this particular sonata, the number 8, very delightful work, begins with a very robust theme in unison between the piano and the violin, very fast, and then they trade off these bouncy ideas, very vigorous writing, lots of splashy sounds. The second movement, oddly, is a minuet. Normally, a minuet is a dance, a pretty stately dance, and rather than the tender, slow movement that Beethoven would normally use, he uses this minuet. But it's a very graceful minuet, a very serene, a nice contrast after the stormy first movement and the very fast last movement. I hope you enjoy this sonata in G. Well, this brings us to the number 10, the last of the violin sonatas that Beethoven wrote. It's a very, very special piece. It's one of my favorites of all the violin sonatas. It's not as stormy as maybe the Kreutzer, not as profound as the Spring, perhaps, but it's very sentimental and had a very strong meaning to Beethoven. It's written 10 years later than the one you just heard, and the one you just heard with Miroslava flying all over the piano, that was obviously premiered by Beethoven on the piano and probably his friend Szczepanik on violin. Whereas the one you're going to hear next was not premiered by Beethoven on the piano, but somebody else. And the violinist was also somebody else. The violinist was a French violinist by the name of Pierre Rode. About 1804, just 2 years after the premiere of this piece you just heard, a 15-year-old boy named Rudolph came to Beethoven and asked for piano lessons. Now, Rudolph came from a very large family, 16 kids, and he was number 16. So he had all these older brothers and sisters. It was a famous family. I'll get to what the family was in a minute, but it was a fairly famous family. And when you're number 16 in a famous family, I guess you probably want to get out of the house and avoid all the goings-on, because there were lots of goings-on with his brothers and sisters. So Rudolph took piano lessons with Beethoven, and Rudolph was a very good pianist. And Beethoven recognized in this kid a real solid musical talent and took him on as a student and really helped him become a fine pianist. So that in 1812, when Beethoven did write this final sonata, he not only let Rudolph do the premiere, but he dedicated the score to Rudolph, this precocious boy, who by that time was a young man. Now, what was this famous family? Well, Rudolph's grandmother, who died when he was 3, was Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. His father was Emperor Leopold II. His father died when he was 5. His father was emperor for but 2 years. And his oldest brother, Franz I, was Emperor of Austria. Now, a bit of explanation, because the history of Austria is extraordinarily complicated. I won't get into the entire thing, but it does feature importantly into this piece. Back in the 12th century, a group of German princes got together and formed what they called the Holy Roman Empire. Now, as everybody knows, the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, but it was a nice name. And it basically consisted of what's now Germany, part of France, part of Italy, part of Czech Republic, and part of a few other states, just kind of Central Europe. It was a loose organization. It was not a strong central government. It was basically formed by about 150 small different states, of which there were 15 that were very important, and the rulers of those 15 little countries were called electors. And these 15 electors would get together whenever an emperor died, and they would elect the next emperor. Not exactly a democracy, because the election always went to whoever bribed them with the most money. Maybe it's like today, I don't know. But so through the centuries, every time an emperor would die, there would be an election, and the electors would get together, they would receive their bribes, and they would vote for whomever paid them the most money. And by about the 1500s, that person usually had the last name of Habsburg. And so the Habsburgs became more or less the de facto family that was going to be the rulers of this large, well, fairly large empire, even though it wasn't an empire. And so Rudolph's family was the Habsburg family, and they were descended from the branch of the family that had more or less been in control of the Holy Roman Empire for 300 years. In that same family was also, by the way, the King of Spain, Ferdinand, who, along with his wife Isabella, sent Columbus to the New World. So it was a fairly large and important family. But in 1806, Napoleon was threatening to engulf the Holy Roman Empire and make it a part of France. So to prevent that from happening, Franz, Rudolph's oldest brother, dissolved the Holy Roman Empire once and for all and changed his title to Emperor of Austria and Duke of Tuscany. So now things got a little bit more normal, a little bit less complicated. But the French were still a problem and would be for about another 6 years until Napoleon was finally defeated. But, so Rudolph has all of this family stuff going on. His grandmother, the Empress, his father, the Emperor, his brother, the Emperor, French armies rolling up and down all across Europe. But Rudolph had his music. And Beethoven wrote not only this violin sonata, but also the famous trio called the Archduke Trio, because Rudolph was an archduke, being the son of the emperor. Now, not only was he an archduke, but he also became a priest and eventually bishop and archbishop of the city of Olomouc in what is now part of the Czech Republic. So, he's Archduke of Tuscany, and he's Archduke of Austria, and he's the Archbishop of Olomouc, but he lives in Vienna, and all he does is study the piano and give parties where Beethoven can have his pieces played, which is not a bad existence if you're in that situation. Now, the piece itself is quite a bit different from what you just heard. As I said, it's more personal, more sentimental. The first movement is not allegro assai, very fast. It's allegro moderato, fast but with moderation. It begins with a trill. It's a very unusual way to begin, with a trill in the violin that extends to a trill in the piano. It's as if they're showing off one back and forth. This is how I trill. Well, this is how I trill. Well, I can trill like this. Well, I can trill like this. They go back and forth with these trills. Very, very interesting passage. The second movement is one of those very tender, slow movements that Beethoven was famous for. And this one begins with a long piano introduction. The violinist must wait for the piano to go through the theme first. This was Beethoven's telling his friend Rudolph, I'm going to let you have this moment to shine. The scherzo brings back a little bit of that storminess. It's in G minor, and then there's an E flat major trio, then it comes back to G minor, eventually ends in G major. And then the last movement is very unusual because we would expect Beethoven to end it with another flying, dizzying array of, this is all the stuff I can do on the piano, this is all the stuff I can do on the violin, and just pay attention and watch. But no, this poco allegretto is a theme and variations that's very tender. And as Beethoven said, from the heart to the heart. Hope you enjoy.
Thank you.